The moment I saw the photo, I knew my marriage was already over, she just hadn't realized it yet. It came through as a simple text message, nothing dramatic, no explanation, just an image sent from Olivia's phone like it was the most normal thing in the world, like she wasn't handing me the final piece of a puzzle I hadn't even wanted to solve, and for a second I just stared at it, trying to process what I was looking at, because denial is a strange thing, it doesn't disappear all at once, it lingers. It tries to protect you, it whispers that maybe there's a reasonable explanation, maybe. It's not what it looks like, but the truth was sitting right there on my screen, clear as day, Olivia standing outside a restaurant I knew too well, her hand lightly wrapped around his arm, Daniel Brooks, her ex, the one she always told me was ancient history, the one she laughed about whenever his name came up, the one she promised meant nothing, and yet there they were, close enough that you didn't need context, close enough that you didn't need to guess, and what made it worse wasn't just that she was with him, it was the way she wasn't even trying to hide it, the angle of the photo, the lighting, the framing, it wasn't accidental, it wasn't something a stranger snapped in passing, it was deliberate, almost like she wanted me to see it, like she wanted to send a message without having to say a word, and that's when something shifted inside me, not anger, not yet, just clarity, because betrayal hits differently when it comes wrapped in confidence, when the person doing it doesn't even feel the need to cover their tracks, and I realized in that moment this wasn't just about her going out with her ex, this was about what she thought of me, what she believed I would tolerate, what she assumed I would accept without pushing back, and that realization was heavier than anything else, because it meant she didn't just betray me, she underestimated me, and that's a different kind of mistake entirely. So I didn't call her, I didn't text back, I didn't ask questions, I just set my phone down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a minute, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the same sound I'd heard 1,000 times before, but somehow it felt louder now, like the house itself was waiting to see what I would do next, and the strange part was I already knew, not every detail, not every step, but I knew enough to understand that reacting immediately would only give her what she expected, a confrontation, an argument, something messy and predictable, and I wasn't interested in predictable, because predictable is easy to dismiss, easy to control, easy to walk away from, and Olivia had spent enough time around me to think she understood exactly how I operated. She thought I was the kind of man who would sit down, try to talk things out, maybe even blame himself for what was happening, and for a long time, maybe she was right, maybe I would have done that, but people change when they see things clearly, and in that moment I saw everything clearly, not just the photo, but the pattern leading up to it, the late nights she brushed off as work, the subtle comparisons she made when she thought I wouldn't notice, the way she started talking about better opportunities and different lifestyles, like she was already halfway out the door, like she had already decided I wasn't enough, and that's when it all clicked into place, not as a question, not as a suspicion, but as a certainty. She wasn't hiding anything because she didn't think she had to, she believed I'd stay quiet, that I'd convince myself it was harmless, that I'd choose peace over confrontation, and that belief gave her confidence, the kind of confidence that makes people careless, the kind that makes them reveal more than they should, and that was her first mistake, because what she didn't know, what she never bothered to understand, was that I had already been paying attention, long before that photo showed up on my phone, long before Daniel's name re-entered our lives. I had been noticing things she thought were too small to matter, and the truth is, small things are never just small things, they're patterns, and patterns tell stories, and once you understand the story, you stop reacting emotionally and start thinking strategically, and standing there in that kitchen, staring at a life that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else, I made a decision, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. I wasn't going to confront her that night, I wasn't going to give her the reaction she expected, because this wasn't the kind of situation you fix with a conversation, this was the kind you resolve by letting people show you exactly who they are, and more importantly, by deciding what you're going to do once they do. And as I picked up my phone again and looked at that photo one more time, I couldn't help but notice the detail that mattered most, the one thing she clearly hadn't thought through, the one thing that told me she had no idea what she had just set in motion, and that's when I realized, she thought I'd be okay with this, she thought I'd let it slide, she thought she was in control of how this story would end, and she couldn't have been more wrong. I did not confront her that night, and that was the part that would have confused anyone who knew me a year ago, because back then I believed problems were solved by talking them through, by sitting across from each other and trying to fix whatever was broken, but standing in that kitchen with my phone still in my hand, I understood something different. Some situations are not misunderstandings, they are decisions. And once someone has made a decision, no amount of conversation changes the intent behind it, so instead of reacting, I started observing, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized this did not start with that photo, it started weeks before, maybe even months. I just had not connected the pieces yet. Olivia had been different, not in a way that could be called out easily, but in small ways that only become obvious when you look back. She started coming home later than usual, always with a simple explanation, always just enough detail to sound believable. Meetings that ran over, clients who needed extra attention, traffic that somehow always seemed worse on the days she looked just a little too composed when she walked through the door, and at the time I accepted it, because trust makes you accept things you probably should question, but there were other details too, things that did not make sense until now, like the way she started dressing for evenings that were supposedly casual, or how she would check her phone and angle the screen away just slightly, not enough to be obvious, but enough to suggest there was something she did not want me to see. And the biggest change of all was in the way she talked, not to me, but about me, subtle comments that sounded harmless on the surface, but carried something underneath, comparisons she would make when we were around other people, mentioning how someone else had just bought a new place or how someone else had moved up in their career, always framed as conversation, never direct criticism, but the message was there if you were paying attention, and I started to realize that Daniel did not just reappear out of nowhere. He filled a space she had already created in her mind, a version of something she thought she was missing, and that was when everything became less emotional and more structured for me, because once you understand the pattern, you stop asking why and start asking what comes next. So I let the night play out exactly as she expected. I stayed home, I did not reach out, I did not interrupt whatever she thought she was building, and when she finally walked through the door hours later, she acted like nothing had happened, like the day had been completely normal. She set her keys down, gave me a quick glance, and asked if I had eaten, the same way she always did, casual, controlled, like there was no reason for anything to be different, and I matched her energy perfectly. I answered simply, I kept my tone even, I did not give her anything to react to, because the moment you show emotion in a situation like that, you give away your position, and I was not interested in showing my position yet, not until I understood exactly where everyone was standing. And the truth was I already knew more than she realized, not just about her, but about him. Daniel Brooks was not just some name from her past, he was someone I had come across before in a completely different context, and that connection was something she never asked about, something she never thought to look into, because in her mind the story was simple. She had options, and I was the safe one, the predictable one, the one who would stay in place while she figured out what she really wanted, and that assumption gave her confidence. But confidence without awareness is just a delayed mistake, and as I watched her move through the kitchen that night, pouring herself a glass of water like everything was exactly as it should be, I realized she believed she was in control of how this was unfolding. She thought she could explore something on the side and return to stability whenever she wanted. She thought I would be there, unchanged, waiting, and that was the moment I understood what I needed to do, not to stop her, not to argue, but to let her continue. Because sometimes the only way to see the full truth is to give people enough space to reveal it completely, and what she did not know, what she never even considered, was that the more she revealed, the more control she was handing over without realizing it, and I was already paying attention in ways she had never expected. The next few days did not explode into chaos the way most people would expect. They became quieter, more controlled, and in that quiet I started seeing things I had missed before, not because they were hidden well, but because I had never been looking for them in the first place. Olivia did not stop seeing him, she did not even slow down. If anything, she became more comfortable, more open in a way that would have seemed careless if you did not understand what was really happening. She believed she had already established the narrative, that I either did not know or chose not to react, and that assumption gave her freedom, the kind of freedom that makes people reveal more than they should, and I let it happen. I watched the way she started leaving the house earlier than usual, always with just enough explanation to sound routine, and I noticed how her tone changed when she spoke to me, less patient, less engaged. Like her attention was already somewhere else, and then came the comparisons, subtle at first, almost disguised as observations. She would mention how Daniel had started something new, how he was taking risks, how he was not afraid to move forward, and the way she said it made it clear she was not just talking about him, she was measuring me against him, and that was when the disrespect became visible, not loud, not aggressive, but steady, consistent, like a slow shift in how she saw me, and that shift showed up in everything: the way she dismissed my schedule, the way she brushed off things that used to matter, the way she acted like stability was something ordinary, something replaceable, and I realized she was not just exploring a connection, she was rewriting her version of our life, placing herself in a story where I was no longer central, just a background detail she could step away from whenever she wanted, and that was when the situation stopped being about emotion entirely, because once someone starts rewriting the story like that, they are already gone. They just have not said it out loud yet, and instead of confronting her, I did something different. I started confirming what I already suspected. I paid attention to names, places, times, small details that most people would ignore, and every piece I picked up fit into a pattern that was becoming clearer by the day. Daniel was not just present, he was positioning himself, showing up in the right places, saying the right things, creating the kind of image that would appeal to someone like Olivia, someone who had started equating change with progress. And the more I observed, the more I understood that this was not random, it was deliberate, not necessarily planned together, but aligned in a way that benefited both of them. And that was when something clicked that most people would miss, because while Olivia thought she was moving towards something better, she never stopped to question what that better actually was. She never asked the questions that matter: who he really was now, what he was building, what he depended on, and more importantly, who stood behind the opportunities he was presenting. And that gap in her understanding was the opening I needed, because what she did not know was not just a detail, it was the foundation of everything that was about to happen. And as I sat across from her one evening, listening to her casually talk about plans that did not include me, watching her behave like the outcome was already decided, I realized she believed the situation was under her control. She thought she could step forward without consequences, that she could test a new path while keeping the old one intact. And that belief was exactly what allowed me to move forward without resistance. Because people only protect what they think is at risk, and she did not think anything was at risk yet, which meant she was not protecting anything at all. And that was when I knew I did not need to rush, I did not need to force anything, I just needed to let the situation develop exactly the way she wanted it to, because every step she took thinking she was gaining control was actually giving me more of it, and she had no idea. The shift became impossible to ignore the night she decided to stop pretending entirely. It was a Friday, the kind of evening that used to mean we stayed in, ordered takeout, and talked about plans for the weekend, but this time she walked into the living room already dressed like she had somewhere better to be, and she did not even bother easing into it. She just said she was going out, no explanation beyond that. No effort to make it sound casual, just a statement delivered with quiet certainty. And when I asked where, not because I did not already have a good idea, but because I wanted to hear how she would frame it, she looked at me for a second, almost measuring how much she needed to say, and then she said his name, Daniel, just like that, no hesitation, no attempt to soften it, as if saying it directly would make it acceptable. And what stood out was not the honesty, it was the confidence behind it. The way she said it, like she expected no resistance, like she had already decided my reaction before I even had one. And that was when I saw it clearly. This was not just about seeing someone else, this was about redefining the boundaries of our marriage without my input. She was not asking for permission, she was informing me of a new reality she expected me to accept, and the way she stood there, waiting but not really waiting, told me everything I needed to know about how she viewed the situation. She thought I would stay calm, maybe uncomfortable, but ultimately compliant, because that was the version of me she had grown used to. And for a moment I gave her exactly what she expected. I nodded, kept my expression neutral, and told her to be safe, simple, controlled, nothing she could push against. And I watched the smallest shift in her face, not relief, not gratitude, something closer to confirmation, like she had just proven a theory she had been testing for weeks, and that confirmation made her even more comfortable. She picked up her bag, checked her phone, and walked out the door without looking back. And that was the moment everything changed, not because she left, but because of how she left, there was no hesitation, no sense of consequence, just certainty. And certainty like that does not come from nowhere, it comes from believing you have already secured your outcome, and that belief was the foundation she was standing on. But what she did not realize was that the foundation was not as solid as she thought, because while she was focused on moving forward, I had already started looking beneath the surface, and Daniel was not the person she believed him to be, not in the way that mattered. He presented himself well, confident, driven. The kind of man who talks about opportunity and growth like it is a language he invented, but I had seen that type before, and more importantly, I had seen what supports it, the connections, the backing, the systems that allow someone like him to appear stronger than they actually are, and that was where things became interesting, because the more I looked into it, the more familiar it felt, not his personality, but the structure around him, the opportunities he was stepping into. The way doors seemed to open at exactly the right time, and that was when I realized this was not just coincidence. There was a connection there, one that tied back to something I understood very well, something I had influence over in ways Olivia never considered, and as I sat alone that night, the house quieter than it had ever felt, I did not think about confronting her or stopping what was happening. I thought about timing, about letting everything align the way it naturally would, because people reveal their true intentions when they believe they are safe, when they believe they have already won, and Olivia believed she had already stepped into something better, something beyond me, and that belief made her careless, it made her open. And that openness was exactly what I needed, because the more she invested in this new version of her life, the more exposed it would become, and the more exposed it became, the easier it would be to show her exactly what she had misunderstood, and not in private, not quietly, but in a way she would never be able to ignore, because the truth only matters when it is seen clearly, and I was already making sure that when that moment came, there would be no confusion left at all. I did not sleep much that night, not because I was overwhelmed, but because clarity has a way of keeping your mind active. It forces you to replay everything with a different perspective, and once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. Every moment from the past few months started lining up in a way that felt almost too precise to ignore, and by morning I was no longer questioning what was happening. I was deciding how far I was willing to let it go before I stepped in, because the truth was, I had already reached the point where there was nothing left to save, not in the way most people think, not through conversations or compromises. That version of the relationship had already been replaced by something else, something built on assumptions she had made about me, and those assumptions were now guiding her actions. So instead of interrupting that process, I leaned into it. I let her believe everything was unfolding exactly the way she wanted, because the more confident she became, the less careful she would be, and that was already starting to show. She began mentioning him more openly, not directly, not in a way that would sound like a confession, but in passing, as if bringing him into conversation made it normal, like it erased the line she had already crossed. And each time she did it, I noticed the same thing. She would glance at me for just a second, not to check if I knew, but to confirm I was not reacting, and every time I stayed exactly the same, calm, measured, unreadable, and that consistency reinforced her belief that she was in control, that she had managed the situation perfectly. But what she did not realize was that I had already moved past reacting entirely. I was analyzing, and the more I analyzed, the more the situation revealed something she had completely overlooked. Daniel was not operating independently. Everything about his current position pointed to support, to backing, to a structure that allowed him to present himself at a level he had not earned on his own, and that detail mattered more than anything else, because structures like that do not exist without oversight, without someone making decisions behind the scenes. And the deeper I looked, the more familiar that structure became, until it stopped being a coincidence and started being something I recognized with absolute certainty. And that was when the situation shifted again, because now it was not just about what Olivia was doing, it was about where she had stepped without realizing it. She thought she was exploring a better option, but in reality she had walked directly into a space I understood far better than she ever could. And that understanding gave me something far more valuable than anger or confrontation. It gave me control. Not loud, not obvious, but quiet and precise, the kind that does not need to announce itself. And as the days continued, I let everything unfold naturally. I let her invest more time, more attention, more confidence into whatever she thought she was building, because every step she took forward made it harder for her to step back, and that was important, not for revenge, but for clarity, because when the truth finally comes out, it only has impact if there is no easy way to deny it, and Olivia was moving closer to that point with every decision she made, and the more she convinced herself that I was unaware, the more she revealed, and what she revealed was not just her actions, but her expectations. She expected me to stay the same, to remain in place while she figured things out, to be the stable option she could return to if needed, and that expectation was the final piece that confirmed everything, because it showed exactly how she saw me, not as an equal, not as someone with agency, but as something predictable, something she did not need to account for, and that was the mistake that would cost her the most, because predictability only exists when you are not paying attention, and I had been paying attention for a long time now, far longer than she realized. The moment I stopped thinking about this as a personal betrayal and started seeing it as a system, everything became clearer, because people like Daniel do not just appear with momentum out of nowhere, they are supported, positioned, and guided, and once I accepted that, I knew exactly where to look, not at him directly, but at the structure around him, the partnerships, the funding channels, the business connections that allowed him to present himself as someone who had already made it, and the deeper I went, the more familiar it all felt, not in a vague way, but in a way that made the situation almost predictable, because I had spent years understanding how those structures work, how opportunities are distributed, how access is controlled, and more importantly, who actually makes the decisions behind the scenes, and that was when I saw it, not as a coincidence, but as a direct connection. The firm backing Daniel's latest venture was not just any group, it was part of a network I had been involved with long before Olivia ever brought his name back into our lives, and that detail changed everything, because it meant I was not just observing from the outside, I was already inside the system he depended on, already in a position where I understood the rules he was playing by, and that gave me something most people never have in situations like this: leverage, not the kind you announce, not the kind you use immediately, but the kind you hold until the timing is right. And what Olivia did not know, what she never thought to question, was that the opportunities Daniel was offering her, the lifestyle he was presenting, the future she was starting to believe in, all of it was built on a foundation she had never examined, and that foundation was not as independent as it looked. It was controlled, structured, and ultimately influenced by decisions made at a level she had no visibility into, and I was part of that level, not in a way that needed to be obvious, but in a way that mattered when it counted. And once I understood that fully, my role in this situation became clear. I did not need to confront, I did not need to argue, I did not need to expose anything prematurely, I just needed to let everything continue while quietly aligning the pieces, because timing is everything in situations like this. Reveal too early and people deny, reveal too late and the impact fades, but reveal at the exact moment when someone is fully invested, when they have committed emotionally and mentally to a path they believe is secure, that is when the truth has weight. And Olivia was moving steadily toward that point. She was spending more time with him, speaking about him with increasing confidence, acting like she had already stepped into something better, and each time she did, she reinforced the narrative in her own mind, making it harder for her to question it later, and that was important, because the stronger her belief became, the more complete the reveal would be. And as for Daniel, he was doing exactly what someone in his position would do, presenting growth, talking about expansion, making plans that sounded impressive on the surface, all while relying on support he did not fully control, and that reliance was the key, because people who rely on systems they do not own are always vulnerable, they just do not realize it until the system shifts, and I understood that system well enough to know exactly where those shifts could happen, not in a destructive way, not in a chaotic way, but in a precise, controlled adjustment that would expose everything without me having to raise my voice or even step into the spotlight. And that was when I made the decision to move forward, not emotionally, not impulsively, but strategically. I reached out through the channels I already had access to, not to make demands, not to create conflict, but to confirm positioning, to understand exactly where Daniel stood within the structure and how dependent he truly was, and the answers I received were exactly what I expected. He was not the foundation, he was the extension, the visible face of something much larger, something that could continue without him if necessary, and that was all I needed to know, because it meant the power he believed he had was conditional, and conditional power is never real power, it is borrowed, and borrowed power can be taken back, and as I sat there processing that information, watching Olivia move through the house like she had already outgrown it, like she had already stepped into a future that did not include me, I realized she was not just underestimating me, she was misunderstanding the entire situation. She thought she had chosen a stronger position, but in reality she had stepped into a space where I understood every variable, every dependency, every possible outcome, and she had no idea, not yet, but she would, and when she did, it would not come from an argument or a confrontation, it would come from a moment she could not ignore, a moment where everything she believed would be tested against reality, and reality does not negotiate, it simply reveals. The invitation came 3 days later, and it was exactly what I had been waiting for, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed the timing was right. Olivia mentioned it casually at first, like it was just another event, a networking dinner Daniel had invited her to, something about investors, partners, people who actually move things forward. The way she said it carried that same subtle edge I had been hearing more often, like she was already comparing two different worlds and had decided which one mattered more. And she did not ask if I wanted to come, she simply assumed I would not, but then she paused, just slightly, and added that I could join if I wanted, the kind of offer that is not really an offer, more of a test, and I could see it in her expression. She expected me to decline, to stay in my place, to let her step further into whatever she thought she was building without interference, and for a moment I considered doing exactly that, letting the situation continue without stepping into it directly. But then I realized something important. Moments like this are not just opportunities for them, they are opportunities for you, if you understand how to use them. So I accepted, calmly, without hesitation. And the look on her face was subtle but unmistakable, not discomfort, not concern, just a brief flicker of uncertainty, like something had shifted slightly out of the pattern she had been relying on, and that was enough. Because it told me she had not planned for this, she had not considered the possibility that I would step into the same space she was trying to redefine, and that small disruption was all I needed to begin setting the stage. The next evening arrived exactly as expected. The venue was the kind of place designed to impress, clean lines, soft lighting, people dressed like they belonged to a certain level whether they actually did or not, and as we walked in together, I could feel the shift in her posture, the way she adjusted slightly, like she was stepping into a role she had already rehearsed in her mind. And then I saw him, Daniel, standing near the center of the room, speaking confidently to a small group, the kind of confidence that comes from believing you are in control of your environment. And when he noticed us, his reaction was immediate, not surprise, but calculation. His eyes moved from Olivia to me and back again, processing the situation in real time, and for a brief second, there was something there, something subtle, recognition, not of me personally, but of something connected to me, and that was all I needed to confirm what I already knew. He understood the system he was part of, but not fully, not deeply enough to see the entire picture, and as Olivia introduced us, her tone slightly elevated, almost performative, like she was presenting something she was proud of. I remained exactly as I had been from the beginning, calm, controlled, unreadable, because this was not the moment for reaction, this was the moment for observation, for letting everything unfold exactly as it was meant to. Daniel extended his hand, confident, steady, and I returned the gesture without hesitation, and in that brief exchange, nothing was said, but everything was understood. He believed he was stepping forward, Olivia believed she had already moved on, and both of them thought the situation was exactly what it appeared to be, but what they did not know, what neither of them had fully realized yet, was that this room, this event, this entire environment they were so comfortable in, was connected to something far larger than they understood, something that had already started shifting before they even walked in. And as the evening continued, conversations flowed, deals were hinted at, futures were discussed with the kind of confidence that only exists when people believe their foundation is secure, and I watched it all quietly, knowing that the foundation was already beginning to move, not visibly, not dramatically, but enough that when the moment came, when everything aligned the way it was about to, there would be no way for them to pretend they had not seen it coming, because the truth was already in motion, and they were standing right in the middle of it without realizing who was actually in control. The shift did not come with a loud announcement, it came quietly, almost politely, which is exactly how real control works. It does not need to raise its voice to be felt, and I saw it begin in the smallest detail, a conversation that paused just a second too long, a phone that buzzed and was checked with just a hint of hesitation, the kind of hesitation that only shows up when something is not going according to plan. And Daniel felt it first. I could see it in the way his confidence adjusted. Not disappearing, but tightening, like someone recalculating in real time, because the room that had been responding to him earlier, nodding, engaging, leaning into his words, was starting to shift its attention elsewhere, not dramatically, not enough for anyone uninvolved to notice, but enough for someone in his position to feel the difference, and that was when his phone lit up again, a message this time, not a call, and I watched as he read it, his expression remaining composed for just a second longer than it should have, before he excused himself from the group with a tone that tried to stay casual but carried something underneath, something closer to urgency, and Olivia noticed it too. Her body language changed immediately, not alarmed, but curious, like she was watching something she did not fully understand yet, and she followed him with her eyes as he stepped away, checking his phone again, responding quickly, moving slightly further from the center of the room, and that was when the first layer of the illusion started to crack, not visibly, not yet, but internally, where it matters most, because confidence depends on stability, and stability depends on control, and Daniel was beginning to realize that something he thought he controlled was no longer as secure as he believed, and Olivia, standing beside me, still holding on to the version of the night she expected, had not caught up to that shift yet. She was still in the mindset that this was his environment, his space, his opportunity, and that belief kept her steady, at least for a few more minutes, until he returned, and when he did, everything was still in place on the surface, the conversations, the atmosphere, the appearance of success, but there was a difference in him now, subtle but undeniable, his tone slightly sharper, his focus slightly divided, like a part of his attention was no longer in the room, and that is when the second signal came. This time not to him directly, but to the group he had been speaking with earlier. One of the investors excused himself after checking his own phone, offering a polite apology about needing to take a call, and then another followed shortly after, and then another, each departure small on its own, but together forming a pattern that could not be ignored if you were paying attention, and Daniel was paying attention now. His eyes tracking the movement, his posture adjusting again, trying to maintain control of a situation that was beginning to move without him, and Olivia finally felt it too. I could see it in the way she glanced at him, then at the room, then back at him again, trying to understand what had changed without asking the question out loud, and that was the moment everything aligned, not in a dramatic collapse, but in a quiet unraveling, the kind that forces realization instead of announcing it, and when Daniel's phone buzzed again, this time he did not hide it, he looked at the message, and for the first time that night, the confidence did not return, it paused, just long enough to expose the truth underneath. And Olivia saw it. She might not have understood the details, but she understood the shift, because people always recognize when the person they are relying on is no longer certain, and that is when she looked at me, not fully, not directly, just a brief glance, but enough to register that something was off, something she had not anticipated, and I met that glance with the same calm expression I had carried all night, unchanged, steady, because this was not the moment for explanation. This was the moment for realization, and what she did not know, what neither of them had expected, was that this was only the beginning, the first layer of a structure they believed in coming apart in a way they could not control, and as the room continued to shift around us, conversations redirecting, attention moving, opportunities quietly repositioning themselves, I knew the next part would not need to be forced, it would reveal itself naturally, because once the foundation moves, everything built on top of it has no choice but to follow. The final moment did not need an announcement, it arrived the way truth always does, quietly but with enough weight that no one in the room could ignore it. Daniel stepped away again, this time longer, his movements no longer controlled, no longer measured, and when he returned, the difference was undeniable, not just to me, but to Olivia as well, because confidence can be imitated, but certainty cannot. And whatever message he had just received had taken that certainty away from him. He tried to resume the conversation, tried to pull the attention back, but it was already gone. The people who mattered were no longer engaged, the opportunities he had been leaning into just minutes earlier had shifted direction, not abruptly, not dramatically, but enough to make it clear that something fundamental had changed, and that was when Olivia finally understood that the version of him she had been believing in was not as stable as she thought. She looked at him again, searching this time, not admiring, not comparing, but trying to find the confidence that had been there before, and it was not the same, it could not be. Because what she had seen earlier was built on a foundation she never questioned, and now that foundation was moving, and the movement was visible, not in the structure itself, but in the way everything around it responded, and that is when she turned to me fully for the first time that night, not just a glance, not just a quick check, but a real look, the kind that comes when something inside you starts connecting pieces you had been ignoring, and I held that look calmly, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with clarity, because this was never about proving a point, it was about letting her see the truth without interference, and after a few seconds that felt longer than they were, I spoke, not loudly, not in a way that would draw attention from the room, just enough for her to hear. I told her that sometimes what looks like progress is just better packaging, and that real stability is not something you step into, it is something you understand, and I could see it register, not fully, not all at once, but enough that she knew there was more behind what was happening than she had ever considered, and Daniel, still trying to hold on to the moment, still trying to maintain control of something that was already slipping away, did not realize that the shift had already reached its conclusion, because control is not about holding on, it is about knowing when something has already been decided, and this had been decided long before tonight, long before she sent that photo, long before she thought she could step into a different life without consequence. And as the room continued around us, conversations redirecting, people moving on to other opportunities, I stepped back, not physically at first, but mentally, because my part in this was already done. I had not raised my voice, I had not made a scene, I had not forced anything, I had simply allowed the situation to reveal itself completely, and that is what makes the outcome undeniable. When people see the truth on their own, they cannot argue with it, they cannot dismiss it, they can only accept it, and Olivia was standing in that moment now, not in the version of the night she had expected, but in the reality she had not prepared for, and I gave her one last look, not to hold on to anything, not to reopen a conversation, but to close it without needing words, and then I turned and walked away, not rushed, not dramatic, just steady, because there was nothing left for me to prove, nothing left for me to explain. She had all the information she needed, and what she did with it was no longer my concern, because the moment she believed I would be okay with everything, she made her decision, and tonight, she finally saw what that decision actually meant. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story made you think, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this.